We think we have conquered this planet. We build mega cities in the desert, we engineer floating platforms on the roaring oceans, and we launch metal capsules into the vacuum of space. But there are zones right here on Earth that fundamentally reject human existence. These are not places where life is merely difficult. These are places where life is physically, chemically, and biologically impossible. Areas of extreme atmospheric hostility that make Mars look like a vacation destination. Today, we are descending into the 5 coldest, most unforgiving locations on the surface of our planet. These are environments so extreme that even the military's most highly classified survival gear fails, where diesel fuel turns to jelly, and where steel shatters like glass. We are looking at the geographical anomalies, the high-altitude death zones, and the deep freeze epicenters of the world. Places where a single mistake, a single mechanical failure, means you are erased from the map. By the end of this journey, you will understand exactly why some corners of our world remain entirely off-limits, guarded not by fences or armies, but by the most lethal temperatures ever recorded. Let's begin at number 5. A place that looks like a pristine, endless ocean of white, but hides a deadly, shifting labyrinth beneath your feet. The interior of the Greenland Ice Sheet, specifically the region surrounding the Klink Research Station. To understand the hostility of the Greenland Ice Sheet, you have to realize that this isn't just land covered in snow. This is an alien landscape composed of an ice cap up to 2 miles thick. It is a massive dome of frozen violence, generating its own localized weather systems. The temperatures here regularly plunge below -93 degrees Fahrenheit, or -69.6 degrees Celsius. But the cold isn't the only thing that kills you here. It's the katabatic winds. Katabatic winds are gravity-driven hurricanes of freezing air. As the air above the massive ice dome cools, it becomes incredibly dense. Gravity pulls this massive, invisible ocean of supercooled air down the slopes of the ice sheet, accelerating it to speeds exceeding 150 miles per hour. Imagine a Category 4 hurricane, but instead of warm tropical rain, it's blasting you with crystalline ice at -80 degrees. If you are caught outside in a katabatic storm without reinforced shelter, your survival time is measured in seconds. The wind strips the heat from your body hundreds of times faster than still air. This environment is so hostile, so impenetrable, that it became the perfect hiding place for one of the most secretive and ambitious engineering projects of the Cold War. In the 1960s, the United States military attempted to build a nuclear-powered subterranean city directly inside the Greenland Ice Sheet, known as Camp Century. The goal was Project Iceworm, a highly classified plan to deploy a network of mobile nuclear missile launch sites hidden entirely under the ice, completely invisible to the outside world. They brought in massive rotary trenchers, carving out deep, frozen tunnels. They installed a portable nuclear reactor to provide power and heat, because conventional fuel was practically useless in this environment. For a brief moment, it seemed like extreme engineering had conquered the ice. But they miscalculated the true nature of this frozen desert. The ice wasn't static. It was alive. The intense, crushing pressure of the 2-mile-thick ice cap caused the tunnel walls to constantly warp and close in. The glacier was slowly, steadily crushing the base. Within a few years, the military had to abandon the facility. They left behind the infrastructure, believing the eternal freeze would entomb it forever. The ice sheet rejected human occupation, crushing the multi-million-dollar underground city. It stands as a chilling reminder. No matter how advanced your technology, no matter your geopolitical ambitions, you cannot permanently occupy the Greenland Ice Sheet. It is an active, hostile entity that actively purges intruders. Moving to number 4, we leave the flat expanse of the ice sheets and travel to a place where altitude and latitude combine to create a vertical freezing trap. We are looking at the upper reaches of Denali, the highest mountain peak in North America, located in the Alaskan wilderness. Now, you might think of Mount Everest when you think of extreme, freezing mountains. But Everest is located relatively close to the equator. Denali sits at 63 degrees north latitude, just a couple of hundred miles south of the Arctic Circle. This geographical positioning makes Denali arguably the coldest mountain on Earth, and an environment completely hostile to human physiology. Near the summit, at an elevation of over 20,000 feet, the temperature has been recorded at a staggering -100 degrees Fahrenheit, or -73 degrees Celsius. But that is just the ambient air temperature. When you factor in the brutal jet stream winds that constantly batter the peak, the wind chill plunges past -118 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, exposed human skin freezes completely solid in less than 30 seconds. But what makes Denali a true dead zone is the catastrophic combination of this deep freeze and severe oxygen deprivation. At 20,000 feet, the atmospheric pressure is roughly half of what it is at sea level. Your body is starved of oxygen. To compensate, your lungs have to work twice as hard, hyperventilating to pull in enough air just to keep your organs functioning. But remember the temperature of that air. You are forcefully inhaling air that is -100 degrees directly into your warm, delicate lung tissue. This triggers a terrifying physiological response. The extreme cold strips moisture from your respiratory tract at an alarming rate. Climbers who brave the upper altitudes of Denali often experience the Denali cough, a violent, rib-cracking spasm caused by the freezing and drying out of the tracheal lining. If you spend too long in this zone, the lack of oxygen leads to hypoxia. Your brain starts to swell. You become confused, lethargic, and prone to making fatal errors. You might feel a sudden, paradoxical sensation of extreme heat, a phenomenon where your dying nerves misfire, leading victims to tear off their heavy parkas in the final stages of severe hypothermia, a condition known as paradoxical undressing. There are no rescue helicopters that can easily reach the high camps of Denali. The air is too thin for rotors to get lift, and the weather is too violent. If you collapse near the summit, you remain there. Your body becomes instantly flash frozen, preserved perfectly in the ice, serving as a grim, permanent marker for future expeditions. It is a fortress of altitude and ice that demands absolute perfection, and punishes the slightest weakness with instant, frozen oblivion. This brings us to number 3. We are now entering the realm of the absolute extreme, a place that tests the psychological limits of humanity just as much as the physical. We are traveling to the geographic bottom of the planet, the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station in Antarctica. While scientists do temporarily inhabit a highly engineered facility here, the environment outside those insulated walls is entirely lethal. To understand the sheer horror of the South Pole, you have to understand the phenomenon of the dark winter. Because of the tilt of the Earth's axis, the South Pole experiences exactly one sunrise and one sunset a year. When the sun dips below the horizon in late March, it doesn't return for 6 grueling months. Imagine a world devoid of sunlight for half a year. The temperature plummets rapidly, averaging -76 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter, and routinely dropping past -100. During these months, the station is completely cut off from the rest of humanity. It is too cold for aircraft to fly. The fuel would freeze in the lines, the hydraulic fluid would solidify, and the metal components of the planes would become so brittle they would snap under stress. For 6 months, the tiny crew station there is more isolated than astronauts on the International Space Station. If there is a medical emergency, a fire, or a critical system failure, there is absolutely no evacuation. No one is coming to save you. Stepping outside during the dark winter is like stepping onto the surface of another planet. You must wear over 40 pounds of specialized extreme cold weather gear. If a fraction of an inch of skin is exposed, You will feel a burning sensation like a hot iron being pressed against you. That is the feeling of your cells freezing and bursting open. The air here is also incredibly dry. It is officially the largest desert on Earth. The cold freezes all moisture out of the air, creating an atmosphere so arid that static electricity becomes a deadly hazard. Walking across a carpet inside the station can generate a static charge powerful enough to fry expensive electronic equipment. But the true danger of the South Pole isn't just the cold, it's the psychological warfare it wages on the human mind. Winter over syndrome is a documented psychological condition that affects the crew. The absolute isolation, the sensory deprivation of endless darkness, and the constant, underlying anxiety of living in a lethal environment take a heavy toll. Memory degrades, concentration vanishes, and intense paranoia can set in. You are trapped in a small, artificially heated box, surrounded by thousands of miles of lethal, black, freezing nothingness. It is an environment that fundamentally seeks to break the human spirit, a sensory void where the only constant is the howling of the wind and the terrifying knowledge that the outside air is actively trying to kill you. We are now entering the final, most terrifying tiers of cold. Having covered the ice sheets of Greenland, the vertical death zone of Denali, and the psychological abyss of the South Pole, we must now move into environments that exist on the razor's edge of what physics allows. These are places where the term cold ceases to be an adjective and becomes a fundamental, crushing force of nature. Let's descend to number 2, the Oymyakon Valley in the Sakha Republic of Russia. If the previous locations were places where humans occasionally visit for science or mountaineering, Oymyakon is a place where people actually try to live, and in doing so, they provide us with a masterclass in the absolute limits of human endurance. Oymyakon is the coldest permanently inhabited settlement on Earth. It is not on top of a mountain, and it is not on a massive polar ice sheet. It is tucked into a valley, surrounded by mountains that trap freezing air like a bowl. In the winter, the temperature here averages an unthinkable -58 degrees Fahrenheit. But it has been recorded as low as -96 degrees Fahrenheit, or -71.2 degrees Celsius. At these temperatures, the laws of physics that govern your daily life begin to malfunction. Consider the simple act of using a vehicle. In Oymyakon, you do not simply park your car. If you turn off your engine, the oil in the engine block freezes into a solid, unmoving paste within minutes. The rubber in your tires loses all elasticity, becoming as brittle as hard plastic. If you attempt to drive, the tires will shatter instantly. Because of this, residents keep their vehicles in heated garages, and if they must go out, they often keep the engines running for days at a time. The sound of a car engine is the sound of life in this valley. If the engine stops, the car is dead. But it isn't just machines that struggle. The human body requires a constant, massive caloric intake just to stay at a baseline temperature. Locals consume high-fat diets, consisting mostly of frozen raw fish and reindeer meat, to fuel their metabolism against the crushing, ambient thermal deficit. The most disturbing aspect of Oymyakon is the reality of death. When someone dies in this village, the ground is so frozen, locked in a state of permanent permafrost, that they cannot bury the dead. To dig a grave, the family must spend days lighting massive bonfires to thaw the surface soil, only to dig a few inches. Then they must repeat the process for days, burning massive amounts of wood just to penetrate the frozen earth. It is a grueling, multi-day ritual just to put a body into the ground. In Oymyakon, you see the true face of the cold. It is a slow, methodical adversary. It doesn't strike with the explosive violence of a storm on Denali, it waits. It waits for your fire to die out, it waits for your engine to cool, and it waits for your battery to lose its charge. It is a siege mentality. The entire village operates on a knife's edge, constantly pumping heat into their homes just to hold back the encroaching absolute zero. It is a place where you can feel the warmth leaving your house through the very walls, a constant, silent war against a climate that wants to turn your home back into an ice block. And finally, we arrive at number 1. We are leaving the realm of human habitation, leaving the mountains, and even leaving the poles. We are looking at a location that is, by every measurable metric, the single coldest place on the surface of our planet. A place where the conditions are so extreme that they defy the conventional wisdom of what is possible on Earth. We are talking about the East Antarctic Plateau, specifically the area near Dome Fuji and the nearby Ridge A. While the South Pole Station is a terrifying place of isolation and darkness, the high plateau of East Antarctica is a landscape that is fundamentally incompatible with the concept of life. This is the highest part of the continent, rising over 13,000 feet into the atmosphere. The air here is incredibly thin, the oxygen levels are abysmal, and the humidity is practically non-existent. In 2013, researchers analyzing satellite data discovered something that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. They found pockets of air and surface temperatures measuring as low as -135 degrees Fahrenheit, or -93.2 degrees Celsius. To comprehend -135 degrees, you have to realize that this is getting dangerously close to the temperature at which carbon dioxide, the very air we exhale, could potentially sublimate into solid dry ice. At this temperature, the air itself feels different. It is heavy, dense, and physically painful to exist within. There is no wind chill factor that can adequately describe the sensation of being in this environment, because the ambient air is already colder than what most industrial refrigeration systems can achieve. What makes this place the undisputed champion of the cold is the total lack of heat traps. In other parts of the world, even in the coldest regions, there is usually some form of heat retention, either from the ocean, from the ground, or from the atmosphere. On the East Antarctic Plateau, there is nothing. The surface is composed of ancient, compressed snow that acts as a perfect insulator against the heat of the Earth's core, while the clear, thin atmosphere allows any lingering heat to radiate instantly into the vacuum of space. Scientists have set up automated, robotic weather stations in these zones, but even these machines struggle to survive. They are designed with specialized, aerospace-grade materials that shouldn't freeze, yet they frequently fail. The batteries crack. The sensors lose calibration. The entire electronic architecture of the station becomes compromised by the sheer, unyielding physics of the cold. If you were to be dropped onto the East Antarctic Plateau at the peak of winter, you wouldn't experience the dramatic death of a blizzard. You would experience a rapid, systemic shutdown. Within seconds, the moisture in your eyes would freeze, causing you to go blind. Within a minute, your airway would close as the freezing air damaged your lung tissue. Within 3 minutes, your brain, unable to cope with the lack of oxygen and the rapid loss of thermal energy, would slip into a state of unconsciousness. You wouldn't even have time to register the pain. Your body would simply be integrated into the plateau, becoming another layer of ice in a landscape that has remained unchanged for millions of years. It is the final frontier of our planet. A place where the Earth reminds us that we are merely guests here, and that the conditions that allow us to live are incredibly fragile, and ultimately, entirely temporary. We look at these 5 places, and we see the limits of our reach. We see the places where the machine of humanity grinds to a halt, where the infrastructure of our civilization is irrelevant, and where the raw, elemental power of the planet reasserts its dominance. These are not just cold places. They are the white void. They are the regions where the planet is still in the grip of a deep, ancient, and absolute winter. And as we continue to explore, as we continue to push the boundaries of what is possible, we must always remember, some doors, when opened, do not lead to discovery. They lead to an end. To understand why these 5 locations act as the ultimate executioners of human ambition, we have to move beyond the mercury in the thermometer and look at the physics of thermal entropy. When we speak of cold, we are really speaking about the absence of molecular energy. In the environments we have discussed, that absence is so profound that it begins to dismantle the complex, fragile chemical bonds that make us human. The physics of the freeze. Why biology fails at the cellular level. The human body is essentially a bag of salt water kept in constant, vibrating motion by heat. Our enzymes, the little biological machines that manage our metabolism, are temperature sensitive. They are designed to operate within a very narrow range, roughly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. When you subject that machinery to the environment of the East Antarctic Plateau or the winds of Denali, you are not just feeling cold. You're witnessing the slowing of time for your own molecules. As the ambient temperature drops, the rate of chemical reactions in your body plummets. This is why you lose dexterity first. Your neurons, which rely on electrochemical signals to fire, start to misfire. The sodium-potassium pumps that regulate nerve impulses require a specific thermal energy to function. When they cool, the signals become sluggish, then chaotic, and finally, they cease. This is the physiological basis of the stupidity that accompanies severe hypothermia. Before you die, your brain forgets how to think, how to coordinate, and how to identify danger. You are literally watching your consciousness dissipate as your biology surrenders to the second law of thermodynamics. But the real, hidden killer in these 5 zones isn't just the cold, it's the desiccation of the air. In extremely cold environments, the air is incapable of holding water vapor. It is essentially an atmospheric vacuum. When you inhale this air, it aggressively leaches moisture from your respiratory tract. You aren't just losing heat, you are rapidly dehydrating. This causes your blood to thicken, becoming more viscous, forcing your heart to work harder to pump it through your veins. Your heart is an engine that is simultaneously being starved of fuel, oxygen, and being forced to pump thick, sludge-like oil, dehydrated blood. In these conditions, heart failure is often the silent, final trigger that ends the struggle long before the cold finishes the job. The engineering collapse. When machines break, we often assume that our technology is the great equalizer. We believe that if we have a sufficiently advanced parka, a heated shelter, or a ruggedized rover, the environment ceases to be a threat. This is a fatal misconception. In Oymyakon, we saw the fragility of mechanical systems. But consider the materials science involved in something like the Greenland Ice Sheet expeditions. Most steel alloys, when exposed to temperatures below -60 degrees Fahrenheit, undergo a phase transition known as the ductile to brittle transition. At normal temperatures, steel can flex and absorb impact. At extreme sub-zero temperatures, the internal crystal structure of the metal changes. It loses its ability to deform, and it becomes brittle, meaning it will shatter like a ceramic plate if struck. This is why, in the world's coldest places, you cannot simply use stronger materials. You have to use different materials. You need specialized polymers and alloys that retain their molecular flexibility at near cryogenic temperatures. And even then, those materials have limits. Lubricants, which are the lifeblood of any complex machine, don't just freeze, they undergo chemical changes. They can become acidic or solidify into a substance that causes catastrophic gear failure. The woe factor of these places isn't that they are merely cold, it is that they are anti-engineering. They are environments that actively exploit the design flaws in our tools. Every bolt, every seam, every electronic circuit is a potential point of failure. When you operate in these zones, you are not fighting the weather. You are fighting the inherent limitations of the materials that make civilization possible. The history of hubris. Lessons from the ice. The history of exploration in these regions is a litany of what happens when human hubris meets the cold. Look at the tragic end of the Scott expedition to the South Pole. Robert Falcon Scott and his team were not amateurs, they were the best of the best, using the most advanced gear of their era. Yet, they were defeated by a combination of the environment and a series of minor failures that turned lethal. A valve that leaked, a bit of fuel that evaporated, a slight change in the wind, or a minor navigational delay. In a temperate climate, these are inconveniences. In the South Pole, they are death sentences. The history of polar exploration teaches us that the cold doesn't care about your resume, your bravery, or your scientific equipment. It is the ultimate auditor. It checks every single account, every single detail, and it collects on every single debt. This is why modern researchers are so obsessed with these places. It isn't just for the sake of geography. It is because these zones are the stress tests for the future. If we want to colonize Mars, we have to survive the Martian cold, which is arguably even more hostile than the East Antarctic Plateau. If we want to operate autonomous systems in deep space or on distant moons, we must first master the art of surviving the most extreme corners of our own planet. The future. Living on the edge as we look toward the future, the human relationship with these extreme cold zones is shifting. We are no longer just visiting, we are attempting to create permanent, self-sustaining pockets of life. We are looking at the closed-loop life support systems. These systems are the holy grail of extreme cold engineering. They involve recycling every single drop of water, reclaiming every bit of heat, and creating a miniature biosphere that can survive in total isolation. It is an engineering challenge of the highest order. It requires us to replicate the complexity of the Earth's atmosphere within a pressurized, insulated shell, while the outside world tries its best to turn that shell into a tomb. But there is a philosophical question that remains: should we? When we look at the East Antarctic Plateau or the high slopes of Denali, we are looking at the few places left on Earth that have not been conquered by human ambition. These are the last, wild, places. Not wild in the sense of forests and animals, but wild in the sense of being untamable. There is a profound, almost spiritual terror in these places. They remind us that for all our advancements, we are still biological entities tethered to a very narrow, very specific thermal envelope. We are creatures of the temperate zone. When we step outside of that zone, we aren't just tourists, we are intruders. As we reach the conclusion of this investigation into the world's coldest, most hostile environments, the message remains clear. We have built a world of comfort, a world of climate control and industrial reliability. But just beneath the surface of that comfort, the ancient, absolute zero of the universe is still waiting. It is the baseline state of our existence. These 5 places are the windows through which we can see that truth. They are the white void, the absolute silence, and the final, enduring testament to the fact that while we have named the mountains and mapped the ice, the planet itself remains the architect of our destiny. And its design, in these corners of the world, does not include us.